In 1942, an Australian general did everything right. Men under his command died anyway. He had every reason to walk away, but he didn't. This is a story about why staying was the harder call, and for him, the better one. So here's the recap. It's 1942, and the Japanese are pushing towards Port Moresby on the southern coast of Papua New Guinea. The best way over the mountains was a single foot track through the Owen Stanley Range. It's called the Kokoda Track or the Kokoda Trail. Australian troops are sent to hold it, and it becomes one of the most brutal campaigns that Australia ever fought in that whole war. And they didn't die mainly from combat, but from the terrain, the diseases they contracted, and the lack of decent supplies and medical assistance. The man leading the largest and most experienced group of troops from August 1942 is Major General Arthur Tubby Allen, and he was the leader of the 7th Division. And he got things right, and then he was sacked 4 days before his plan was proven correct. And that's a story that, if people know about it all, kind of gets glossed over as we move on to what happens next. But it's a story I'd like to sit with so we can talk about what on earth it has to teach for us. I've been a chaplain for over 10 years and a pastor for 6 years before that. And I've routinely sat with people who are carrying the weight of significant challenge for people subordinate to them and dealing with the choices they themselves haven't made. Recently, I had the opportunity to walk a slice of the Kokoda Trail, and I want to be really honest. I had all the privileges, right? I was well fed, well looked after, the weather was great, it was the middle of the year. My conditions were absolutely nothing like what the soldiers faced. It was a privilege for me to go and see that terrain, and it was incredible. It was steep, it was relentless, it was formidable, and this was on a good day. I looked over and saw that a fall could meet one's end. And so it gave me enough insight just to understand just a little bit what it was like to walk and fight on that trail. This video is for people who hold responsibility for others, maybe a team or a congregation, where you've done the right things, but it's been read by those above you as the wrong thing. And Alan's story has something to teach those who are in those kinds of situations. So, Alan didn't lead from a map table. He was really close to his troops. He listened to them, he sought to understand them, and to make himself understood. He worked really hard to build confidence in his troops, and they certainly needed it. A Berryman, who was a contemporary of his, and he was not an easy critic of people, he held Alan's leadership in the highest professional regard. He called Alan's responses under pressure strong and solid. Big compliment in that time. Alan is said to have done a sterling job under pressure. Closeness to his people for him was not decorative, it wasn't for the cameras, and it wasn't sort of a soft skill that gets added after the real leadership. It was the heart of how he did his role. Training them, inspecting them, giving them tactical updates that they really needed to understand. He never lost touch with what it meant to be a fighting soldier. And he had led at every level of command and successfully led his troops in the Middle East in earlier part of World War II. So, when Alan was given the job to push back the Japanese on the Kokoda Trail, he built his plan around the actual terrain, around the supply lines, which were incredibly challenged. Everything had to be walked in and out, and trying to do his best to provide the medical support that they would need, including evacuation. GHQ, so it's the headquarters back in Australia, had a complete lack of understanding of the terrain. Their maps were not correct. They could see distances, but they couldn't see terrain. That is how steep the mountains really were. So the plan was worked out by Tubby Allen, and he understood what was happening on the ground correctly. And he predicted that they would not meet resistance after they had defeated the enemy at Aurora Creek. And so it was. Kokoda fell on the 2nd of November 1942, 4 days after Alan was removed, as he had predicted. So distance from your people doesn't just risk bad optics. In this case, it was bad planning overall. They just didn't have the supplies and understanding of what could get through and what couldn't. The troops did not have enough food, they didn't have enough medication or ammo, they didn't have appropriate clothes, they weren't the right colour, they weren't the right fabric, they were freezing at night. Blamey could have driven in a Jeep to the track in just one morning to see some of this terrain, but he didn't. MacArthur went out there once for a photo op, not to really understand the terrain. Alan was close to his men and he understood what they were fighting on. So it raised the obvious question, why did he get sacked? The answer sat above him. And to a degree, it sat above his boss, Herring, even his boss, Blamey, and somewhat above MacArthur. The fight for that track didn't fully make sense in tactical terms alone. It served a bigger purpose, and that was the complete removal of the Japanese from Papua New Guinea entirely, removing the threat, not just stopping them from reaching Port Moresby, which was their goal, in order to exclude Australia from participating in the war. There was another alternative. The terrain was actually defeating the Japanese. They could have safeguarded Port Moresby and allow the terrain to do most of the heavy lifting in terms of pushing back the enemy. But no one wants the enemy on their territory. And so the ideal plan became to push them all the way back. Alan and his men had no place questioning that bigger picture call. Their job was to equip themselves as best as they could inside the mission handed down to them from above. They didn't get to ask big questions. So the real waste in this story doesn't sit with Alan. It sits with the people who set the goal far above the ground that they were fighting on. So I don't usually talk much about war stories. They don't actually grip me most of the time. But this is not a war story to me. It's about a story that we can actually hold up against our own leadership, even when the stakes are not nearly as high as fighting a war. If the decision to fight this campaign wasn't Alan's to question, the removal wasn't really about his competence. So what was his to decide? Well, one thing, whether to stay. And for those who tell the story, and it's not many people, that's how it's usually told, that he was relieved of command and sent to a lesser posting, a sort of fall from grace, although not in rank. And his one-up boss, Herring, was to ensure that Alan never commanded troops and actions again. It was a terrible end to a really successful military career. But before the removal, Blamey had offered him relief more than once, and it was a quite frequent and respectable practice. Commanders under the kind of strain that he was in would get rotated out. And Blamey had good reason to believe that you should rest your commanders and put in people who had a fresh perspective. And Alan kept saying no. I can't prove the next part, I can't find it written down anywhere, but here's what I think. Alan knew that his replacements would have led from far further back with far less understanding of the terrain. That's not written anywhere, it's just how I read it. And men did still die under Alan's command as he stayed. As I said, often from disease and lack of medical care rather than enemy combat themselves. And one thing needs to be made really clear, I think. It's that Alan lived. He's not the victim in the story. It's not his tragedy. His endurance is the point. He stayed working inside a broken system, trying to do right by people who themselves weren't offered the opportunity to be substituted out. So he's not the victim. So here's what success meant for him. It wasn't about keeping rank or being proven right. It meant doing good in the system instead of leaving early. And he carried real cost to that, I think. He didn't get any credit. The choice wasn't as simple as doing the right thing or not. They're sort of easy choices to make. His choice came down to three things: what he knew in the moment, what he knew about the terrain, and what he knew about his own men. His capacity to keep leading well under that kind of pressure, and those who still had confidence in him. We also need to do something uncomfortable, and that's to critique committed military professionals, Alan's superiors. So in the military, they were at a political level, they just didn't back him. They didn't take the time to understand what he was asking for, medical evacuation among other things. And he wasn't delivering at the pace that they wanted, and so they removed him. Alan believed that any replacement that he had would have less field command experience than he did. And that wasn't arrogance, that was actually just about who was available and the fact that Tubby Allen was one of the most experienced commanders of his time. In the end, that proven track record didn't matter enough. He couldn't stay because he no longer had the confidence of the people above him. So you can probably hear from that, that's not just a war story. It's a story of someone weighing up what they do, how they absorb pressure from people who don't see the ground that's affecting them. It could be a manager holding a target that's been set well above their head, or a staff member that's carrying out decisions and policies that they know aren't going to work. Ethical conduct in that situation isn't about picking one right answer. It's about weighing kind of what you know, what you can handle, and what you can truly do. So here's the question we're thinking about. If you're in a situation that's far from ideal, but your presence is still protecting people around you, what do you need to do to support yourself while you stay and plan a safe retreat for everyone? Thanks for watching. This is Sanctuary Corner.